Hello and welcome back. Today I wanted to cover how you can distribute your Foundry modules using GitHub. We'll cover two methods. The first is a manual, easy to understand way. The second is a little bit more complex, but it's automated. At a very high level, we're going to be creating a GitHub repository, adding a manifest URL and download links to the manifest file, and pushing our code to the repository, and then uploading a zipped version of our code as artifacts so that someone can download things. All right, so the first method that we're going to cover is a little bit manual. It's a little bit confusing, but it's probably the simplest way to do this. The first thing we want to do is go ahead and make a new repository on GitHub. Let's call this repository release test. This is a test of GitHub releases. And that's all we can do, create a repository. Then in VS Code, we're going to create a module folder, and in my module folder, I just have two files, init.js and module.json. Init.js just has one line, it's a console.log. It's just to show you that everything's working. Then in our module.json, most of the stuff we covered in our shared content module, name, title, description, author, version, etc. Instead of packs, we now have a scripts object where we have a list of scripts that we want to attach. In this case, we want to attach init.js to our module. It's in our folder. We just copy that name in. And then we have three new fields which I've left blank for now: URL, manifest, and download. The URL field is the URL of our GitHub repository. It can be the URL of our module, so if you want to link to your Patreon page, if you want to link wherever else, that's totally fine. But most people just link to the GitHub repository page, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. For the manifest and download, we're going to leave these blank, and we're actually going to come back and fix these in just a moment. We make sure we save after we make that change. Now we're going to initialize this as a Git repository and push it to our GitHub repo. So to do that, I'm going to make this a little bit taller. First thing we're going to do is do a git init. This will initialize this as a GitHub repository. Then I'm going to add all the Git files. These are the two files. You'll see now they are green instead of orange. That means they've been added. Next, we're going to commit these files. That's git commit tac a tac m. Tac is another word for hyphen. It's what programmers use. And then single quotes, init commit, single quote, just like so. After I've done that, these are ready to be pushed. We just have to connect the remote repository. To do that, we're going to follow along the middle step here. I'm going to literally just copy the exact steps that they do word for word. So git remote add origin, https, github.com, /man-dev-git, release test.git, git branch m master, git push u origin master. So literally those exact three steps I followed. Give it a second. After it's pushed the code, we can go ahead and clear it. One thing you'll know about my coding style, I like to use the clear on console a lot. Other people don't. It's just a me thing. All right, so we have a repository. We have some code in that repository. What are we going to do next? Next, we're going to actually work on creating a release. So before we do, we want to create a zip folder for the files that we just created. So let's open this up like so. This is our module folder. It's the same folder that I was working in. So it's our module.json and init file. I'm going to copy these two. I'm going to go ahead and add to archive. Click OK. And it's going to create a zip file here. In the meanwhile, I'm also going to add a .gitignore file in our repository. A gitignore file ignores files so they don't get pushed to GitHub. And we don't want this zip file to be pushed into our repository. We do want to push to GitHub, but as a release, not as part of our repository. So I'm going to go ahead and add release module test.zip. That's going to gray it out so it doesn't get pushed. And we are going to add our gitignore and push our gitignore. Gitignore and git push. Cool. So now there should be another file in here. Gitignore. Cool. Now we're going to create a new release. What should we call it? Let's call it version 1.0.0. version 1.0.0. We want to target the master branch. We only have the master branch. Some change log. We don't really have any changes, so it doesn't matter. Next, we're going to take that zip file that we created and attach it to where it says attach binaries by dropping them here or selecting them. And then we're also going to take the module.json and we're going to attach it here as well. So these two files we're going to attach. And I'm going to say publish release. Now, you'll notice that after you've attached and published them, you have module.json and release module test.zip. If we go back to our module.json here, and let me close out this, we'll see that now we have the manifest and download URLs to fill out. The manifest URL is the link to this module.json. So if we copy link address here, it'll paste it. And we'll actually know what the link address stands for. It's just our github.com, your GitHub name, the repository name, releases, download. This is the tag. So we tagged it as 1.0.0. And then module.json. That's all this is. And then the download is the zip file. Same exact thing. Copy link address. There we go. And then we're going to do the same thing again, except we're going to do one change. Instead of it being 1.0.0, let's make this 2.0.0. And we know that we're going to change the tag of this. So we're going to update the URL here to point to the new URL. This URL doesn't exist yet, but we're going to make it after we push our code. So it's going to exist in the future. Let's go ahead and take care of that by git status, git commit, 2.0.0 release, git push, boom, doom, doom. So this pushed the new code in. I'm going to also go back to here, delete the zip file we had, zip up these files again. So it's a new new archive with the new module.json. Because remember, we modified the module.json to have those new links in it. So now if we go to release test, there's the 2.0.0 release. We want to go ahead and create, draft new release, tag 2.0.0, release title 2.0.0, some change log, and just like we did before, drop the module.json and the zip file, and then publish release. Cool. So these two files are now ready to be downloaded. If we right-click module.json and we click copy link address there, and we go into Foundry, and we put this here, and we click install, our module was downloaded successfully. There we go. Release tests. Perfect. So that's how you distribute for release, and you can actually then go to the Foundry package submission form on FoundryVTT.com and actually submit this for approval so other people can download and use your module. So that is the kind of complicated but simple way to do things. Next, I'm going to show you the much cooler Git workflow way to do things, but it requires a little bit of coding. So I'll see you in the next part. Before we move on to the next part, I actually just want to take a moment to kind of explain. Some of you might be wondering, why don't we just use the source code zip here instead of why are we uploading a zip file when GitHub creates a zip file for you? There's actually a number of really good reasons for this. The first reason is that a lot of the times we don't want all of our code bundled in into this zip file. The source code.zip is going to be all of the code that's in your repository. Right now, that's only 3 files, git ignore, init, and module.json. But even now, I don't want the git ignore file in my module.json. There's no reason that someone downloading my module needs the git ignore file. So by bundling a zip directly as a binary, I can pick and choose exactly what files go into the download that a player gets when they download my module. Secondly, one of the reasons I really like bundling this as an artifact is you can actually go and check the download statistics of artifacts. You cannot do that with these generated zip files, but you can with with artifacts. So if you go to this website, and I'll link this in the description, and you type in your name, so spacemandev.git or -git, and we put in, say, any repository. Let's check out my card support repository. You'll see that I know my total downloads. I've had 80 total downloads. And I can go down and I can actually see on the latest release that this was downloaded like 55 times, it was downloaded 20 times, etc., etc. And you could see it actually per release. The way I've set up this repository, none of the releases matter, only the latest ones matter. But if I had per release downloads, I would be able to see per release downloads as well. So those are like two big reasons. The third big reason is that you can actually change the zip file, which you can't change the source zip. But if you edit the release, you can remove this and upload a different one. So if you want to hot swap in code without changing your entire repository, you made a typo, you made some mistake, whatever else, you can actually hot swap in that zip file and still have the link to it work and everything. So those are the three reasons that you don't want to use the source zip and you want to bundle your own zip in. All right, next we're going to go over the much cooler way to handle your release workflow. And we're going to do that using GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions are super powerful. They're a way to do continuous integration and continuous delivery for your source code. And they're free for public repositories. I'm not going to go over everything that GitHub Actions can do. This is not a video about GitHub Actions, but I will go over how to use GitHub Actions specifically for the modules that you might be writing. So to get started, let's go back to our code. Here we're going to create a new folder called .github, and then we're going to create a new folder within that called workflows. And within that, we're going to create some new files. One is going to be getVersion.js, and another one is going to be main.yml. The main.yml is actually going to define our workflow. We'll get back to it in just a second, but first let's do our get version. And the get version file, we're going to do let fs equals require fs. So what the get version file is going to do is actually going to read our module.json, read what the version is. So when we update the version, it's going to always reference the newest version and create a release based on whatever the version is. So we're going to require fs and then console.log json.parse fs.read file sync and then module.json, read it as UTF-8 version. So what's happening here? First, we're going to read the file. Then from that file, we're going to parse it into a JSON object. And then of that JSON object, we're going to grab the version attribute. If I wanted to grab the description attribute or the name attribute, I would just do name or whatever else. But we want the version because we want the tag to be version. Next, we're going to output it to console. And this is useful because we're going to take that output, whatever it outputs to console, and we're going to use it in our main.yml file. So next, let's set up this workflow. This is going to get a little bit complicated, but I assure you we're going to work through it. It's going to be, I'm hoping that you'll be able to understand everything that I do. And if you don't, please make sure that you comment down below, and I'll try to clear things up in the comments or on Discord as I can. So first, let's name this pipeline. We want to call it module build and module builder, whatever you want. And then on push, on branches, master, so we want to trigger it whenever we have a push to master. We don't want to trigger it when we have pushes to our development branch or anything else, so we don't pollute the releases. We only wanted to create a new release whenever we push to master. This is just standard GitHub flow. Normally your master branch is your stable branch, and then all of the other branches are unstable where you do all your testing. If you wanted to create releases that were on your development branch or both master and development, you could just simply add more branches here. Next, let's define the jobs. And actually, there's only going to be one job. It's called build, but it will have 3 steps. We're going to create a zip file from all of the code that's in this repository. We're going to create a release, and then we're going to attach the zip file and the module.json as artifacts onto the release. So we'll go through this step by step. First thing we need to do is give it a little bit of context. So what do we want it to run on? And we want it to run on Ubuntu latest, basically saying start up a container, Ubuntu latest. Next, we're going to have it check out the repository. And then we're going to do uses, actions, checkout at v2. So Actions has a huge package library of code, and whenever you do uses, we're using one of those packages. And so here we're using one of the Actions packages called checkout, which is a piece of code that will check out that repository onto that container. Okay, so now we have the repository, it's on that container. What do we do next? Well, first, let's create a zip file from all of that code. So let's do name zip files. Then we want working directory, which is the current working directory. And then we want it to run a command. The run command is our zip-tac-r module.zip, and we want it to get all of the files. So what is this doing here? This is the output. So the output is module.zip. This is the input. The input is all of the files. If you wanted to grab only the files from like the dist folder, you can change the working directory to dist. And this is useful if you had like a compile step, if you're using TypeScript and you have a giant repository with a ton of code and you only wanted to grab the code that's in the dist folder. Well, you can compile it into the dist folder, change your working directory to dist, and then zip things there. So for us, we don't have a dist folder. We don't need to worry about that. What does tac-r do? Tac-r says look into folders of folders. So if we're compiling things here and we had a folder called packs like we did in our shared content module video, we wanted to go in and grab all the files within that folder. And if that folder has other folders within it, we wanted to recursively go through that. That's what R stands for, recursive. Okay, so now we have defined a new module.zip. It has zipped up all the files. Next, let's go ahead and get the version of the new release that we want to create. So for this, we want to run this command in bash. That's shell bash. We want to give it an ID, get version. This is how we're going to refer to it in future steps. And then we want the run command. We want it to echo set output name equals version. And I'll explain what all of this does in just a second. And in parentheses, node.github/workflows/get version.js. I think I messed up somewhere, but it's going to tell me why. Oh, I said runs instead of run. There we go. So what is this doing? First, it's going to use the Node.js to run the script getVersion.js. That's going to output to the console. That's our getVersion.js file. It's going to output to the console the version that's in our module.json. After it outputs that, we're going to take that and we're going to assign it to the name version. And we're going to set the output of this command, one of the outputs of that command, to version to be that value, whether it's 3.00, 4.00, whatever value we have for the version. This will become clearer when we get to the next step on how we actually use this. So let's go to, name create release. So let's actually create the release now. Let's call it create release. And we're going to call it, we're going to use NCI Apollo, NCI Apollo release action at v1. So someone named NCI Polo, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, has created a bundle of code for us that will automatically do the release creation stuff. So we're just going to use that. And we're going to pass in some parameters. So allow updates. Absolutely. We want to be able to update this release with new zip files if we want to. What do we call the release? We're going to keep it simple, release, and then we're going to use this special syntax with curly brackets, steps.getVersion.outputs.version. So let's go into how this works. Steps we'll go through this steps object. Get version is the ID that we defined here. So steps object, grab the list item that has the ID get version. Of that, grab the outputs object, which is right here. And of that, grab the version of the outputs, and this is here. If we had other outputs here, for example, if we ran the script and there were 2 or 3 outputs, we might have one that's version, one that's something else, one that's name, one that's description, and we might be able to do other things with it. For example, we might write a script that does get version, outputs get version, and outputs get name. And instead of the name of the release being release version 1.0, it might be release name or something else, or however you want to do that. We're going to keep it simple though, and just use the version as the name of the release. Draft, it's not a draft release. In the same line, it's not a pre-release. Next, we'll get into the token. The token is what GitHub needs to associate this with your user account. GitHub already knows what our user account is because this is running on GitHub. So we can use the secrets object, which manages our tokens, and just call that GitHub token. And then what artifacts do we want to attach to this release? Did I spell artifacts right? Probably not. Probably, I don't know. And we want to attach the module.zip and the module.json, these 2 files from this repository. Module.json already exists, and then module.zip was created in this first step. And then let's tag it, and we'll tag this as the latest release. Actually, I'm going to tag this with tag this release the version number. So the name of the release and the tag of the release are going to be the same. It's just going to be the version number. Cool. That's it. That's all we need in our workflow file. So if we do git status, git add, you'll probably need to add this file, git commit. I've already added this. Updated workflow, git push, give it a second. Oh, I am also going to do another push. I'm going to change my versioning to version 4 for everything, just so we get a new release. I'm going to push that, and I'll show you how this looks. Cool. Now let's hop over to our GitHub repository. If we click on the Actions tab, it'll show us that it's doing some building. If we click on one of them, it'll say it's queued job. It's processing the job. We can actually see it do this live. It's creating the release. It was able to do everything. It completed the job. If we go to our repository again, there we go. The new release was created. And if we copy the link address to the module.json, this is what we can now distribute. And we open up Foundry. Da-da-da-da. Add-on module, and we install this like so. Hopefully this, and there we go. The module installed successfully. Now we can share this module to whoever we want. And whenever we push to this repository, if we go and we change our version number, so say we added some more code, console.log, some new code, and we updated our module version to version 5. We have to update these to 5 as well. And we can go ahead and git commit, git push, and then it'll create the 5.0 release and attach those objects directly. So this is a really cool way to automate that manual process that we did before using GitHub Actions. If we go here, give it a second, you'll see that orange means that it's currently working on this release. If you do too many releases, it starts to slow down your release, but give it a second. Build it, and we have release 5.0. And you can actually, using this, if someone wanted to use a different version of your module, if we go to all releases, if you wanted to use release 4.0 or release 3.0, you can just give them the old module.json, because that's going to point to the old module.zip. And so they can use different versions of your module based on which version of module.json you give them. If you want the latest one, you can always just point to the latest one. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. The next step after this would be to go submit your module at FoundryVTT.com. Under Modules and Systems, go for the package submission form, and you can fill out that form and actually submit your module to show up in the module finder inside of Foundry, rather than having to distribute the link to your module.json manually. Please like and subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know what kind of content you want to see in the future. Hopefully this helps you automate your releases on GitHub, and how to just learn, and hopefully you learned how to automate your release workflow. Thank you so much for watching.